Welcome back, everyone. This video is going to be a little bit different. You're not going to be looking at me today. It's just going to be my voice going over this homeschool guide that I have put together for people who are thinking about homeschooling this year and just don't know where to start. I know there is so much information out there and you have a lot of questions like, what do I need to teach? What should I send to school? What curriculum do I use? How do I know if I'm doing enough? So I'm going to go over all of that with you today. I'm going to walk you through some of the basics of getting started, different curriculums, different online learning options, what you should keep for records, and some of the things that I wish I knew when I first started my homeschool journey. Before we get into any of the paperwork or curriculum, the first thing I want you to do is stop and think about why you're considering homeschooling, because that answer is going to look different for every family. Maybe your child is struggling academically. Maybe school has been a constant battle. Maybe your child needs something that traditional school just isn't providing. Maybe you're looking at homeschool temporary, or maybe you're considering it making your long-term plan. And you don't have to have all that figured out today. I know I didn't. I think sometimes parents feel like before they pull their children from school, they're supposed to have this beautiful curriculum purchase and a schedule hanging on the wall and your entire year planned out, but you really don't. Start with your why. What does your child need right now? What isn't working? What would you like education to look and feel like for your child? Once you understand that, the rest of the decisions become a little bit easier. So before we get started with what Massachusetts requires, take a minute and really think about those questions. Okay, now let's talk about Massachusetts because I think this part scares parents. When I first started looking into homeschooling, I thought that it was going to be like this very specific curriculum that I had to follow for each grade level. Like if your child's in 7th grade, here's exactly what 7th grade homeschool has to look like. And that's not how it really works. In Massachusetts, you're going to submit a home education plan to your district. You're basically explaining what you plan to teach, what curriculum or materials you're going to use, and what your schedule or instructional time will generally look like, and how you're going to evaluate your child's progress. And I really want parents to understand that it's only a plan. You're telling the district what you're planning on doing. It doesn't mean that you're locking yourself into one curriculum for an entire year. One of the benefits of homeschooling is being able to recognize when something isn't working and change it. You'll also notice that I broke down some subject areas by elementary, middle, and high school on this page, and I did that just to give you a starting point. We're going to look at the age groups a little bit closer on the next few pages. First, let's take a look at elementary school. For elementary students, obviously we're building those really important foundational skills like reading, writing, phonics, spelling, grammar, and math. But education isn't only about the academics. At this age, the kids are really learning how to follow a routine, manage their time, take responsibility for something, use technology appropriately, find a book at the library, and gradually become more independent. These are skills, and homeschooling gives us so many opportunities to teach them naturally. You also don't have to sit at a desk with a worksheet for every subject. Science can be an experiment in the kitchen. Math can happen while you're baking. Geography can happen while you're looking at a map and planning a trip. And reading can happen at the library. Especially with younger kids, I think hands-on learning can be incredibly valuable. So don't look at this page and think, okay, I need to order 10 different workbooks. Look at it as a list of areas where you're creating opportunities for your child to learn. Middle school is where I think we need to start looking beyond just whether a child knows math, science, English, and social studies, because this is also when we suddenly start expecting kids to manage a lot more. They're expected to organize themselves, remember assignments, manage deadlines, take notes, study for tests, keep track of materials, manage their time, and become more independent. And those are all executive functioning skills, and they don't magically appear just because a child reaches middle school. They need to be taught. That's why I specifically included executive function on this page. If your child struggles with organization, you can actually work on organization. If they don't know how to use a planner, teach them. If they don't know how to study, that's something you can also teach. And those things absolutely have value in your homeschool plan. The academic subjects are important, but we're also trying to prepare our kids to eventually manage learning independently. And homeschool gives us the flexibility to slow down and explicitly teach those skills instead of constantly penalizing a child because they haven't developed them yet. High school homeschooling can look intimidating because now parents are starting to think about credits, graduation, college, careers, and what's going to come next. But I want you to notice something about this page. Yes, we have the traditional subjects, the English, the math, science, social studies. But look at the electives: graphic design, coding, business, entrepreneurship, financial literacy, psychology, culinary arts, agriculture. This is where homeschooling can become really individualized. If you have a teenager who has absolutely no interest in one traditional elective, but lights up when they're learning about business, cosmetology, computers, cooking, mechanics, animals, whatever it happens to be, there are ways to bring interest into their education. Sometimes this is how we get a child interested in learning again, especially with teenagers. I really think we need to start asking, what are we preparing this child for? Not every student is going to take exactly the same path after high school, so their education doesn't necessarily have to look exactly the same either. This page is really important to me. These aren't necessarily things I'm telling you that Massachusetts requires. These are just my recommendations, because my goal isn't just to get a child through a curriculum. I want our kids prepared for life. Financial literacy, communication, self-advocacy, executive functioning, digital citizenship, career exploration, independent living skills. Think about how much our kids are going to use these things as adults. If my child can solve an equation but doesn't know how to manage money, ask for help, communicate with someone professionally, recognize misinformation online, manage their time, or advocate for themselves, then I think we're missing something. And homeschooling gives us an incredible opportunity to teach those things. Some of this doesn't even need to look like school. Let your teenager help create a grocery budget. Have them make an appointment. Teach them how to write a professional email. Let them volunteer. Teach them how to research something and figure out the source they're reading it from. Talk about careers. Talk about money. Talk about mental wellness. Teach them how to ask for help. Learning happens everywhere, and I think preparing a child for life is just as important as preparing them for the next test. Okay, so now we know some of the things we can teach. The next question is usually, what am I actually going to use to teach it? And this is where homeschool curriculum shopping can get overwhelming very quickly. So instead of giving you a giant list of programs, I narrowed it down to some resources that I think are worth knowing about, and more importantly, what type of learner each one may work well for. There is no one homeschool program that is going to be perfect for every child. I think that's one of the mistakes that we can make when we start homeschooling. We find a program that somebody else absolutely loves, we pay for it, and then when our child doesn't do it well, we think we're the ones doing something wrong. You're not looking for the program that everybody else says is best. You're looking for the program that works for your child. Think about how your child learns. Do they need videos? Do they like games? Do they need somebody actually teaching the lesson? Do they learn better by reading? Do they need repetition? Do they get frustrated when they get something wrong? Do they need short lessons? Do they need a lot of structure? Or do they need more freedom? And you also don't have to use one program for everything. You might love one program for math and hate it for language arts. And that's okay. That's one of the benefits of homeschooling. You can mix and match. So as I go through these, don't think, which one am I supposed to pick? Just think, which one of these sounds like my child? The first one I want to talk about is time for learning. Time for learning is one that I think is worth looking at if you're a parent saying, I need structure. I don't want to build an entire curriculum from scratch. This gives you that structure. There are lessons, activities, quizzes, and assessments, and parents have planning and reporting tools to help track your child's progress. It's also self-paced, so you have some flexibility in how quickly your child moves through the material. One of the reasons I specifically included executive function on this page is because sometimes we forget how much executive function traditional school requires. Remember the assignment, write it down, bring the right book home, remember the due date, find the worksheet, and turn it in. For a child who struggles with executive function, sometimes all that becomes a barrier before they even got to the actual learning. An online structured program can remove some of those steps. Now, that doesn't mean time for learning is going to teach your child executive functioning or that it's automatically the right program for every neurodivergent child. it means the structure may reduce some of the planning and organizational demands. And there's an important distinction here. Time for Learning is a curriculum, not a virtual school with live teacher. The parent is still overseeing the child's homeschool education. So if you want something structured and largely laid out for you, this is one that I would explore. But maybe you don't need an entire curriculum. Maybe your child just needs somebody to explain a concept differently. And that's where something like Khan Academy can be really useful. Khan Academy is one of those resources that I think is just really good to know exists. One of the biggest benefits is that it's free. I especially like the idea of Khan Academy for a child who needs to stop, rewind, and hear something again. Think about a traditional classroom. The teacher teaches the lesson, the class moves forward, and the child may still be thinking, I don't understand step 2. And that's where a video lesson, they can pause, rewind it, and then watch it again. They can go back to an earlier skill if they realize they're missing a foundation. I think that can be really helpful for students who need information broken down or who feel uncomfortable asking a teacher to repeat something several times. I wouldn't look at Khan Academy and automatically think this needs to be my entire homeschool. Think of it as like just another tool in your toolbox. If your child is stuck on fractions, algebra, grammar, science, go see if there's another explanation that clicks. Sometimes a child doesn't need more practice, they just need someone to explain it differently. I think IXL can be really helpful when you want to know where the gaps are, when you have a child that needs targeted practice. So maybe your child is technically working at a certain grade level in math, but you're noticing that something isn't clicking. Instead of starting the entire grade over, you can work on specific skills. That's where I like this type of program. It can give parents information about what the child has mastered, what they're struggling with, and where additional practice may be needed. But I want to make another clear distinction here. Learning a concept and practicing a concept are not always the same thing. If my child fundamentally doesn't understand fractions, giving them 50 more fraction problems may not solve the issue. I might need to stop, teach it another way, find a video, or go back and figure out what prerequisite skill is missing. So I like IXL particularly as a way to identify and practice skills, not as a reason to make a child sit here endlessly answering questions when they're clearly not understanding a concept. And also pay attention to frustration. A program can be academically appropriate and still not emotionally appropriate for your child. The next 3 programs are a little different because we're going to get into more targeted supplemental resources. The first one is Common Lit. Common Lit is primarily something that I would look at for reading and language arts. This can be really useful if you want your child reading actual passages and then working on comprehension, vocabulary, analysis, and written responses. And this is where I want parents to remember that homeschool doesn't have to mean buying another giant language arts curriculum. Maybe you already have something that you're using for grammar and writing, but you want stronger reading comprehension. You can add a resource specifically for that. Common Lit can also be useful as children get older because we're not just asking them, can you read the words? We're more looking for, do they understand what they're reading? Can you find evidence in the text? Can you explain what the author means? Can you compare ideas? Those are very different skills from simply being able to read fluently. Read Theory is the next one. Read Theory is another supplemental resource that I like for reading comprehension. One thing that parents should pay attention to with reading programs is reading level versus reading grade level. Those are not always the same thing. You might have a 7th grader who is not currently reading at 7th grade level. Giving that child 7th grade material over and over isn't necessarily going to close the gap. Sometimes we need to meet the child where they actually are and build from there. And that's another thing about homeschooling that parents need to be comfortable with. Meeting your child where they are is not lowering expectations. We're figuring out where the foundation is shaky, strengthening it, and then moving forward. Because if we keep building on a skill the child hasn't mastered, eventually that gap gets bigger. And especially for math, especially for kids who absolutely hate the idea of sitting down and doing another worksheet, there's Prodigy. Prodigy is very different because it's game-based, and this is where knowing your child matters. Some kids love this. If you tell them, go do 20 math problems, absolutely not. Put those same math problems inside a game where they're earning rewards, progressing through something and playing, completely different child. That doesn't mean every piece of learning should be turned into a game, but engagement matters. So if a child is willing to practice a skill longer because the format is enjoyable, that's useful information for us as parents. I particularly look at something like Prodigy as supplemental practice. Teach the concept, make sure the child understands the concept, and then something game-based can be a fun way to reinforce it. And again, this goes back to what I said at the beginning. We are not asking which program is best. We are asking what works for our particular child. OutSchool is interesting because now we're moving away from the idea that mom and dad have to personally teach everything. There are online classes covering all kinds of subjects and interests. And I think that this can be valuable when your child has a very specific interest, or when you've reached a subject where you're thinking, I am not the person to teach this. That's okay. Homeschooling doesn't mean you personally have to be an expert in algebra, chemistry, French, coding, art, or anything else that your child might want to learn. You can bring other people into their education. I think this interest-based learning can be incredibly powerful for kids who have lost confidence in themselves as learners. Maybe your child struggles through traditional academics but absolutely lights up when they're talking about animals, animation, gaming, cosmetology, history, art, coding, whatever their thing is. Then start here. Let them experiencing being good at learning again, and then build from that. OutSchool can also give homeschool students opportunities to interact with instructors and other students, depending on the class format. But just like everything else I've talked about, look at the individual class and the instructor. One OutSchool class might be amazing for your child, and another might not be a good fit at all. Again, remember, we're choosing for the child, not choosing the program because everybody else likes it. So after looking at all of those programs, if you're sitting here thinking, okay, now which one am I supposed to use? Remember what I said at the beginning, you don't need all of them. You might use one primary curriculum and one supplemental program. You might use different programs for different subjects. You might try something for a month and realize your child hates it. Change it. That's not homeschool failing. That's actually one of the benefits that I keep talking about. You noticed something wasn't working for your child and you adjusted. The goal isn't to recreate school at your kitchen table. The goal is to create an education that works for your child. Okay, now we've talked about what you can teach and some of the programs that you can use. So naturally, the next question is, what is my homeschool day actually supposed to look like? And this is another place where I think parents put way too much pressure on themselves. Your child does not necessarily need to sit at a desk from 8 o'clock in the morning until 2:30 in the afternoon just because that's what a traditional day looks like. Remember, a traditional school day includes a lot more than direct instruction. Kids are changing classes, they're waiting for everyone to settle down, they're having lunch, they're going to specials, lining up, waiting for other students to finish. The list goes on and on. At home, you're working with one child or maybe a few children. Learning can look way different. So when you're building your schedule, think about your child first. When do they learn best? Do they need to get up and get started right away? Or do they function better with a slower morning? How long can they realistically focus before they need a break? Do they do better getting math out of the way first, or is math an absolute worst possible way to start the day? There's no one correct answer. The goal is to create a routine that is predictable enough for your child to know what is expected of them, but flexible enough that you're still able to respond what your child needs. This page is exactly what it says it is, just a sample. Please do not look at this and think, okay, Kaylee said that this is what I have to do Monday through Friday. No. I included this because when you're brand new to homeschooling, sometimes you just need to see what a week can look like. You might do math and reading more frequently because those skills build on each other. Science and social studies might happen a few times a week instead of every single day. You can rotate the subjects. You can have a day for projects, experiments, the library, field trips, and hands-on learning. And your schedule can change. Maybe you start September with one schedule and by October you've learned, okay, this absolutely does not work for us. change it. That's not a failure. That's you learning how your child learns. I would actually expect your homeschool schedule to evolve, especially during your first year. Let's talk about record keeping. This doesn't have to be complicated, but I absolutely recommend that you keep records as you go instead of trying to recreate an entire school year at the end. Create a folder. It can be physical, digital, or both. Keep copies of the home education plan that you submitted to the district. Keep your correspondences with the district. Keep some work samples of your child's work. Keep track of the curriculum and programs that you're using. Keep assessment information or progress reports that your programs generate. If your child completes projects, take a picture. If you're doing field trips or educational activities, you can keep a simple log. You do not have to save every single worksheet that your child completes. You're creating a record that helps show what your child learned and how they progressed over the year. Honestly, this isn't only for your district, it's really helpful for you, because 6 months from now, when you're wondering, are we actually making progress? You have something to look at. Sometimes progress is much easier to see when you compare where your child started and where they are now. This is something I wanted to include because I don't think that we really talk about it enough when we tell parents how to start homeschooling. We talk about the initial plan, but what happens at the end? Your district is going to need information regarding your child's progress, and this is why I just talked about the record keeping throughout the year. Don't wait until you receive something from the district and then panic thinking, what am I supposed to send them? If you've been keeping records, you've already been preparing for this. Depending on how you kept your records, you may have work samples, curriculum reports, assessments, a portfolio, progress information, or another form of evaluation. What you're trying to show this school is that your child made educational progress throughout the year. A child may still struggle with math at the end of the year, but made meaningful progress from where they started. That's why I like documenting a starting point. Where were they when we began? What did we work on? Where are we now? That tells a story of progress. On this page, I've given you an email template. And I'm not going to sit here and read this whole thing to you because you can pause this and use it when you need it. I included this because sometimes the hardest part isn't knowing what you want to do. It's figuring out what to actually say. You can copy this, change the information in brackets, personalize it for your family, and then send it to your district along with the information they're requesting. And here's something I recommend whenever you're communicating with the school, keep the email. Create a folder in your email specifically for homeschool correspondence, what you have sent and what the district sends back. Save your approval correspondence and anything related to progress. You don't have to obsess over every document and every little thing. Just create an organized paper trail so that if you need something later, you're not searching through a year's worth of emails to find it. I wanted to end this guide with the things that I wish that somebody had told me. Because you can research curriculum all day long. You can read Massachusetts requirements. You can make the perfect schedule. But none of that really prepares you for what it feels like to actually make the decision to homeschool your child. You may question yourself. You may wonder if you're doing enough. You may see what another homeschool family is doing, immediately think that you should be doing that too. You may buy a curriculum that you are so excited about and your child absolutely hates it. That's okay. Your homeschool does not have to look like anybody else's, and it definitely does not have to look like the classroom that your child just left. Give yourself time to figure out who your child is as a learner. Pay attention to what works and pay attention to what doesn't. Do not be afraid to change course. Some days are going to be incredibly productive and some days aren't. That's real life. What matters to me is that we're creating an education where our kids can learn, make progress, build confidence, and begin to understand themselves as learners. You don't need to have the next 12 years figured out. You just need to know what your child needs next. If you're just beginning this journey, I hope this guide makes that first step feel a little less overwhelming. Take what works for your family and change what doesn't. Ask questions and give yourself permission to learn right alongside your child. And remember that knowledge builds confidence and confidence changes everything.